In the grim darkness of the far future, where war is the only constant, the Imperium of man stands as a bastion of humanity's survival. The age of the Emperor brought unparalleled unification and progress, but even the greatest empires are not immune to cataclysmic upheaval. The galaxy had barely begun to heal from the searing wounds of the Horus heresy, an apocalyptic civil war that pitted brother against brother and nearly saw the Imperium undone. The fallout of this monumental conflict reshaped the very fabric of humanity's dominion across the stars, leaving scars that would echo through eternity. As the fires of rebellion were quelled and the traitorous legions were cast into the warp's shadowy embrace, the Imperium teetered on the brink of annihilation. The Emperor, humanity's guiding light, was interred upon the golden throne, his mortal body shattered, but his spirit a constant beacon. With the master of mankind no longer able to lead directly, the burden of preserving his dream fell to his loyal sons and their descendants. The Second Founding arose as a direct response to the chaos and devastation, an act that would redefine the very nature of the Adeptus Astartes and ensure the survival of the Imperium for millennia to come. Yet, this monumental event was not born out of triumph, but necessity. It was an act of desperation in a galaxy racked by betrayal, where trust was a fragile commodity and strength was the only currency. To understand the Second Founding, one must first grasp the context in which it unfolded. A universe plagued by ceaseless conflict, with fractured allegiances, the resurgence of ancient threats, and the eternal shadow of chaos looming over all. It was a time when the Imperium stood at a crossroads, its survival balanced on a razor's edge. This is the story of how the Imperium's mightiest warriors, the Space Marines, were divided and reshaped to safeguard humanity's future. It is a tale of sacrifice, strategy, and vision, a moment in history that would resonate through the ages. But to truly comprehend the significance of the Second Founding, we must first examine its key players, the individuals and factions whose decisions would shape the course of galactic history forever. Only then can we begin to unravel the threads of destiny that converged in this pivotal moment. At the heart of the Second Founding were the figures and factions that shaped its course, their identities etched into the annals of history. Each played a pivotal role, their presence essential to the event's outcome and legacy. First and foremost were the leaders of the surviving Space Marine legions. As veterans of the Great Crusade and the Horus heresy, they were tasked with an extraordinary burden: to preserve the legacy of their battle brothers while preventing any future betrayal. These commanders, each molded by war and tested by loss, were entrusted with reshaping their legions and establishing new commands. The legions themselves were central to this transformation. Once vast, singular entities numbering in the tens of thousands, they had carried the Imperium's banner across the stars. However, the Second Founding saw them divided into smaller independent chapters, each with its own command structure and traditions. These new formations were not mere fragments, but designed as fully autonomous armies, ensuring that no single force could again threaten the Imperium's survival. The newly created chapters inherited not only the gene seed of their forebears, but also their customs, heraldry, and philosophies, though no two chapters would be identical in character or doctrine. Beyond the Space Marines, the High Lords of Terra were crucial to the Founding's implementation. This council of the Imperium's most powerful political and military leaders wielded immense influence, their decrees shaping the future of humanity. Charged with ensuring the Imperium's stability, they oversaw the bureaucratic and logistical efforts required to restructure the legions. Their endorsement of the Founding was necessary to legitimize such a sweeping reorganization of military power. Equally significant were the artisans and genetic custodians of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They safeguarded the gene seed necessary for the creation of the new chapters, overseeing its purity and distribution. Without their expertise, the Second Founding could not have taken place. The Tech Priest's role was as indispensable as it was delicate, for the secrets of bioengineering the Emperor's warriors remained a closely guarded tradition, and their cooperation ensured the continuity of the Imperium's most powerful defenders. Among the staunch defenders of the Founding's purpose were those within the ecclesiarchy, the religious body devoted to maintaining the imperial creed. While their theological influence grew in later eras, they were already asserting their authority, providing moral justification for the reorganization by framing it as an act of divine will, a safeguard against treachery and heresy. Their support helped foster unity among the populace, who often struggled to comprehend the full magnitude of the changes to the Imperium's elite defenders. In stark contrast, there were factions within the Imperium who met the Founding with uncertainty or outright dissent. Conservative military leaders feared that the splintering of the legions would weaken humanity's defense against its myriad enemies. Others questioned whether such fragmentation was truly the will of the Emperor or a dangerous overreach by the Imperium's administrators. The Second Founding, therefore, was not only a military reform, but also a political struggle, with competing visions for humanity's future clashing in the shadows of Terra's grand halls. Finally, the fledgling chapters themselves played a role in their own formation. While many of the new leaders saw the Founding as a necessary evolution, others viewed it as a bittersweet legacy, a painful reminder of the heresy's cost. These commanders, battle-tested and fiercely loyal, took on the solemn duty of forging new identities from the ashes of their former legions. The warriors who filled their ranks had to adapt not only to new command, but also to the challenge of preserving the honor of their origin while standing apart as something distinct. As the fabric of the Imperium was rewoven through this Founding, it became clear that each actor, from the Lords of Terra to the warriors who took up their new banners, carried the weight of the galaxy's fate upon their shoulders. The Second Founding was not merely a process of dividing forces, but a test of the Imperium's resolve, shaped by the contributions and sacrifices of those who stood at its heart. Their actions, choices, and visions would determine whether the Imperium would stand united or crumble under the weight of its past sins. The Second Founding did not occur in a vacuum. It was the inevitable result of a galaxy-spanning crisis that shattered the foundations of the Imperium. The Great Crusade had once been a beacon of unification, a campaign designed to bring every fragment of humanity under one banner and illuminate the stars with the Emperor's vision. Yet, this monumental achievement was undone by betrayal on a scale so vast that its consequences rippled across all of human space. The Horus Heresy, a catastrophic civil war, left the Imperium scarred and vulnerable, with much of its strength consumed by internal strife. Entire worlds burned, fleets were lost, and bastions of civilization were reduced to ash. The aftermath of the heresy was defined by devastation and chaos. The Imperium had survived the cataclysm, but its survival had come at a terrible cost. The military power that had once served as the Imperium's shield and sword was now seen as a potential threat to its continued existence. The legions of space marines, which had once embodied unity and strength, became a source of fear for some imperial leaders. Their immense size and influence were deemed dangerous in the wake of rebellion. The lesson learned from the betrayal was that even the mightiest force could be corrupted and turned against the very ideals it was sworn to protect. With the Emperor no longer able to guide his realm directly, the question of how to prevent another such catastrophe became paramount. The Imperium's survival now depended on finding a way to fortify itself not only against external enemies, but also against the threat of internal treachery. The decision to divide the Space Marine legions into smaller, independent chapters was rooted in the desire to ensure that no single force could ever again accumulate the power necessary to launch a rebellion of the same scale. The logic was simple but profound. By decentralizing military power, the Imperium could create a more resilient structure that would be harder to shatter from within. However, the crisis was not purely military in nature. The Imperium's vast bureaucracy had been stretched to its breaking point. Entire sectors lay in ruins, while vital supply chains had been disrupted, leaving countless worlds isolated and defenseless. Rebuilding efforts required not only soldiers, but administrators, artisans, and resources that were now in scarce supply. The strain of holding the Imperium together placed unprecedented pressure on its leadership. In such dire circumstances, efficiency and cohesion were essential, and the existing military framework was seen as too unwieldy to adapt to the demands of a post-heresy galaxy. The psychological impact of the heresy also played a significant role in shaping the second founding. The scale of the betrayal had created an atmosphere of paranoia and distrust. The notion that once legendary warriors could turn against their comrades was a wound that time alone could not heal. The leaders of the Imperium recognized that faith alone was not enough to prevent future disasters. Structural safeguards had to be implemented to rebuild trust and stability, both within the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes and across the broader Imperium. Additionally, the war had exposed weaknesses in the Imperium's defense against external threats. While the civil war raged, alien empires and opportunistic warlords had taken advantage of the chaos to carve out their own dominions. Once the heresy was quashed, the Imperium faced not only the task of internal stabilization, but also the challenge of reclaiming lost territory and dealing with new enemies emboldened by humanity's weakness. To counter these external dangers while avoiding further internal fragmentation, the military forces of the Imperium needed to be reorganized into smaller, more adaptable units that could respond swiftly to crises without requiring centralized oversight. The loss of key worlds and strategic installations further contributed to the decision. Star fortresses and fortress monasteries that once symbolized imperial dominance had been destroyed or corrupted. Entire networks of defense had been compromised, forcing the Imperium to adopt a more flexible strategy. The second founding emerged as part of a broader effort to rebuild not only the military, but also the infrastructure needed to support the Imperium's vast expanse. Smaller, autonomous chapters could operate more efficiently, maintaining their own supply lines and fortifications, thereby easing the logistical burden on the Imperium's central command. The founding was also influenced by the growing complexity of warfare. The heresy had introduced new forms of destruction, arcane weaponry, forbidden technologies, and acts of destruction that bordered on the apocalyptic. The lessons learned from these conflicts reinforced the necessity of decentralization. Smaller chapters, while less overwhelming in individual strength, were more flexible and could adapt to diverse battlefield conditions. This adaptability was viewed as a crucial advantage in an era where conflict could arise from any corner of the galaxy. Ultimately, the second founding was born out of a desperate need to adapt to a galaxy that had been fundamentally altered by war. The Imperium's leaders sought to prevent another heresy, not merely by imposing stricter laws, but by reshaping the very nature of its defenders. It was not a decision made lightly, but a calculated response to an era defined by loss, betrayal, and ruin. The devastation of the heresy had made one truth painfully clear: survival required transformation. And so, the wheels of change began to turn, setting the stage for one of the most significant reorganizations in the history of the Imperium. The process of the second founding unfolded as a series of coordinated yet complex actions that spanned across the Imperium. It began with a declaration that reverberated from Terra, outlining the necessity for restructuring the Adeptus Astartes. This was not a simple directive, but a monumental undertaking that required every loyal legion to participate in the process of division and reconstruction. The announcement marked a pivotal point in history, signaling the official end of the era of vast legions and the dawn of independent chapters. The initial phase involved an extensive reorganization of military assets. The massive war fleets and armories, once maintained by individual legions, had to be reassigned and distributed. Forge worlds, already strained from the destruction wrought by the Horus heresy, were called upon to produce the necessary war gear for the newly formed chapters. Entire fortresses were refitted to serve as chapter headquarters, while new chapter banners and symbols were commissioned to ensure that each formation carried its unique identity. This phase was accompanied by extensive ceremonial rites designed to honor both the legacy of the legions and the fresh beginnings of the chapters. The next stage was the formal designation of the chapters themselves. For some, this process was straightforward, as their origins were clear and closely aligned with their parent legion's traditions. However, others were given more distinct identities to create distance from the traumatic events of the past. Names, heraldry, and doctrines were finalized, with some chapters maintaining close ties to their original legions, while others were granted full autonomy and a mandate to forge new legacies. This diversification allowed for a balance of shared loyalty and operational independence, fostering both unity and resilience. Simultaneously, the allocation of command roles was a critical undertaking. Veteran commanders who had proven their loyalty and strategic acumen were entrusted with the leadership of the new chapters. These leaders were charged with not only guiding their forces, but also instilling a sense of purpose and cohesion among warriors who had once served together as part of a larger whole. The bonds forged in battle remained strong, but the necessity of standing apart as distinct entities was made clear. Leadership appointments were formalized through ceremonies conducted on key worlds, where oaths of service were sworn under the watchful eyes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, ecclesiarchy representatives, and imperial officials. As the chapters took shape, they were tasked with securing their assigned sectors of the galaxy. This phase involved establishing fortress monasteries, securing recruitment worlds, and conducting initial operations to assert their presence. Each chapter was expected to demonstrate its readiness to uphold the Imperium's defense, reinforcing the idea that no single entity would ever again hold unchecked power. These demonstrations of strength often included joint campaigns with other Imperial forces, showcasing the adaptability of the new chapters and reassuring the Imperium's population that the restructuring had strengthened rather than weakened humanity's defenders. One of the most significant logistical challenges was the distribution of the gene seed required to create new space marines. The Adeptus Mechanicus played a vital role in this endeavor, carefully overseeing the gene forging process to maintain stability and prevent degradation. Entire vaults of genetic material were safeguarded and meticulously transported to the home worlds of the new chapters. This process was carried out under the strictest security measures to prevent tampering or sabotage. The production of aspirants for each chapter was ramped up, ensuring that the new formations would not only sustain their strength, but also grow over time. The establishment of recruitment traditions further defined the individuality of each chapter. While the parent legions had maintained their own unique methods for selecting and training recruits, the new chapters were given the freedom to adapt or innovate their practices. This freedom allowed some chapters to embrace their origins fully, while others chose to develop entirely new customs that better suited their assigned roles and environments. Some recruited from war-torn hive worlds, seeking the fiercest survivors of humanity's harshest conditions, while others drew from remote, isolated populations known for their resilience and purity. As the reorganization progressed, political tensions arose. The oversight of the High Lords of Terra ensured that the founding proceeded without deviation from the original directive, but concerns about regional loyalties and emerging power dynamics persisted. Some sectors questioned the placement of certain chapters in key strategic regions, fearing that these deployments could lead to favoritism or unintended rivalries. However, the necessity of a unified front against external threats kept dissent from boiling over, as the Imperium could ill afford internal discord so soon after surviving a galaxy-wide civil war. The final phase of the founding was the formal recognition of the chapters by the Imperium as independent military entities. This recognition was not merely symbolic. It marked the completion of a monumental restructuring effort that spanned years of preparation, negotiation, and sacrifice. With their banners raised and their missions defined, the chapters dispersed across the stars to carry out their duties. Some remained near the core worlds to serve as the Imperium's bulwark against new uprisings, while others were dispatched to the frontier, tasked with reclaiming lost territory and neutralizing new threats. The conclusion of the second founding marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in the Imperium's history. Though the wounds of the Horus heresy still festered, the newly created chapters embodied the Imperium's resilience and determination to endure. Their formation represented not only the culmination of a vast organizational effort, but also a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and rebuild in the face of unimaginable loss. With the founding complete, the Imperium took its first steps toward restoring its strength, though the echoes of the past would continue to shape its future for millennia to come. The decisive moment of the second founding was not a singular battle or a triumphant victory, but an unprecedented administrative and military decree that reshaped the very structure of the Adeptus Astartes. The critical decision was the formal division of the original Space Marine legions into smaller autonomous units known as chapters. This measure was not merely a restructuring of command. It was a radical redefinition of how humanity's most powerful warriors would be organized, trained, and deployed across the galaxy. This choice re-engineered the Imperium's military doctrine, setting in place a safeguard against the potential for internal treachery while maintaining the strength needed to repel external threats. The division itself was codified in what became one of the most important documents in the Imperium's history, the Codex Astartes. This extensive set of doctrines provided detailed instructions on the size, structure, and operational conduct of the new chapters. The Codex established that each chapter would consist of roughly 1,000 warriors, an intentional limit designed to prevent any one military force from becoming so vast that it could rival the Imperium itself. This standardization was intended to ensure that no chapter could wield enough concentrated power to repeat the horrors of rebellion that had nearly destroyed the Imperium during the heresy. The decision to adopt this model was monumental. It required the loyalist leaders to relinquish control over their vast legions and instead entrust their legacy to multiple successors. Some saw this as an act of humility and selflessness, a necessary step to preserve the Imperium's stability and honor the Emperor's vision. Others, however, viewed it as a painful disbandment, a forced disassembly of legacies forged in the fires of countless wars. The choice to divide the legions was not universally embraced, and it tested the resolve and loyalty of many commanders. The restructuring was as much a psychological battle as it was a logistical and military undertaking. The implementation of the division was overseen by a central council that ensured the decree was followed uniformly across all remaining loyalist legions. This council held the authority to mediate disputes, approve new chapter designations, and enforce adherence to the Codex's mandates. The council's role was not to command the chapters, but to serve as stewards of the transition, ensuring that the intent behind the reorganization was preserved throughout the process. Their oversight marked a pivotal shift in the balance of power, transferring a degree of authority from individual commanders to a more distributed and regulated system of governance. A key element of this transition was the emphasis on autonomy. Once the chapters were established, they were given significant independence in their operations. While they were required to adhere to the foundational principles set forth in the Codex, each chapter was free to interpret and adapt those principles based on its circumstances. This balance between standardization and autonomy was intended to create a more flexible and resilient force, capable of responding to the unpredictable and diverse threats that plagued the Imperium. The symbolic weight of the division was reinforced through formal ceremonies held across key worlds. During these events, the banners of the original legions were often retired, replaced by the newly consecrated symbols of the chapters. These moments were not only demonstrations of loyalty, but also acts of closure, marking the end of an era defined by the Great Crusade and the heresy, and the beginning of a new chapter in the Imperium's history. For the warriors who had once fought side by side under a single banner, these ceremonies carried a profound emotional weight, representing both loss and renewal. One of the most profound effects of this decision was its impact on the chain of command. The leadership within each newly formed chapter was selected based on merit, with experienced veterans assuming key roles. However, unlike the original legions, Where authority often stemmed from seniority within a single unified structure, the new chapters had to cultivate their own traditions and chains of command. This restructuring created a level of decentralization that had never existed before, reinforcing the idea that no single entity should hold dominion over vast swaths of the Imperium's military power. The pivotal resolution to enforce this division marked a turning point not only in terms of strategy, but also in ideology. It symbolized a departure from the notion of monolithic unity and instead embraced a philosophy of distributed strength. By limiting the size of each chapter and granting them operational independence, the Imperium hoped to ensure that its defenders could withstand not only external enemies, but also the corrosive effects of internal power struggles. This ideological shift became a cornerstone of imperial policy, influencing military doctrine for millennia to come. Despite the carefully laid plans, the decision carried inherent risks. Splitting the legions into chapters introduced new complexities, including the potential for fragmented responses to large-scale threats. Coordination between chapters would now require diplomacy and cooperation rather than automatic obedience to a single command. The Imperium had to place its trust in the cohesion of its warriors and their shared purpose, hoping that the bonds of brotherhood would transcend the boundaries of new identities. The gamble was immense, but it was deemed necessary to prevent another catastrophic rebellion. Ultimately, the defining choice of the second founding was to prioritize survival through division rather than consolidation. The formation of independent chapters represented a deliberate acknowledgement that the Imperium's strength lay not in monolithic force, but in resilience, adaptability, and mutual reliance. The division reshaped not only the structure of the Adeptus Astartes, but also the very concept of loyalty, reinforcing the belief that unity did not require uniformity. It was a decision born from the ashes of betrayal, meant to forge a future where no single tragedy could ever again threaten the Imperium's existence on such a devastating scale. The second founding reshaped the Imperium of Man, creating ripples that extended far beyond the immediate reorganization of the Adeptus Astartes. The most visible impact was the creation of hundreds of autonomous chapters, each tasked with defending humanity's domains across the galaxy. This redistribution of military power fundamentally altered the Imperium's defensive strategy. No longer centralized within colossal legions, the new chapters became a web of smaller but highly adaptable strike forces, capable of rapid deployments to counter emerging threats in remote regions. This transformation allowed for greater territorial coverage, as chapters were positioned in critical sectors to provide localized protection against Xenos incursions, chaos uprisings, and rogue human factions. The decentralization brought both stability and vulnerability. The Imperium's new military model was more resilient to internal treachery, as no single chapter possessed the numbers or influence to challenge the broader power structure. However, this also meant that in times of overwhelming crises, cooperation between chapters became essential to mount an effective defense. This necessity forged alliances among certain chapters, who began to form bonds of mutual support and coordination. Yet, this very need for cooperation also laid the groundwork for regional rivalries. Some chapters developed fiercely independent identities, their differing interpretations of the Codex Astartes and divergent traditions causing friction with their counterparts. The political influence of the Adeptus Astartes was also diminished. Where once the mighty legions could sway the outcome of entire sectors through sheer might, the new chapters operated with less autonomy in interplanetary governance. Imperial governors and the High Lords of Terra retained greater authority, and the balance of power shifted in favor of the Imperium's bureaucratic and political institutions. While this reduced the risk of another military rebellion, it also increased tensions between civilian authorities and the chapters who viewed themselves as the Emperor's chosen defenders, free from the influence of mortal politicians. In the immediate aftermath of the founding, this redistribution of power had a profound effect on recruitment worlds and war zones alike. Planets that had long served as the primary recruiting grounds for entire legions now found themselves divided between multiple chapters. For some, this was seen as a chance to forge new legacies. For others, it was a source of discontent, as the bonds between these worlds and the chapters they supplied were strained by the new structure. The competition for recruits led some chapters to adopt more extreme methods of candidate selection, intensifying the already brutal trials faced by aspirants. In contrast, others developed recruitment rites steeped in the cultural heritage of their new home worlds, creating traditions that would endure for millennia. The changes also extended to the strategic infrastructure of the Imperium. The fortress monasteries, established as chapter strongholds, became vital hubs for both military operations and regional governance. Some fortress worlds were fortified to an unprecedented degree, becoming near impregnable bastions of Imperial might. These strongholds served as deterrents to would-be invaders and reminders of the Imperium's enduring strength. However, the dispersal of resources required to build and maintain these fortresses placed a strain on the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Administratum, both of which were already struggling to rebuild after the devastation of the Horus heresy. This logistical burden led to tensions between the chapters and the Imperium's central authorities, as requests for additional supplies or reinforcements were not always fulfilled promptly. One of the more subtle yet significant impacts of the Second Founding was the cultural divergence that began to take root within the Adeptus Astartes. While the original legions had possessed unique identities, the newly formed chapters further developed their own distinct philosophies, doctrines, and symbols. This diversification allowed for a more flexible and adaptable military force, but it also sowed the seeds of ideological differences that could lead to isolation or even conflict. Some chapters clung tightly to the tenets of the Codex Astartes, adhering strictly to its guidelines, while others treated it as a set of suggestions rather than absolute law. This divergence created a spectrum of interpretations, ranging from near reverence to outright skepticism regarding the Codex's mandates. The fragmentation of the legions also left a psychological mark on the warriors themselves. For those who had survived the heresy, the transition from serving as part of a vast, unified force to a smaller, independent chapter was a profound shift. Some embraced the newfound autonomy and saw it as an opportunity to build something new from the ashes of war. Others mourned the loss of their legion's unity and struggled to adjust to their new roles within the restructured hierarchy. This internal struggle shaped the identity of many early chapters, influencing their traditions and shaping their outlook on loyalty, duty, and honor. Externally, the Second Founding sent a clear message to the enemies of the Imperium. Despite the devastation wrought by civil war, humanity had endured and emerged with a stronger, more distributed defense network. The Xenos empires and renegade human enclaves that had exploited the Imperium's moment of weakness now faced an organization designed to withstand both external sieges and internal fractures. The new chapters were highly mobile and specialized, capable of striking with precision and operating independently for extended campaigns. This shift in strategy forced humanity's adversaries to adapt, and some alien species began to fear the rapid response of these smaller yet deadly forces. However, this period was not without complications. The dispersal of the chapters across vast distances sometimes left sectors vulnerable when larger threats emerged. Entire regions could be isolated during massive invasions, requiring an unprecedented level of cooperation between the chapters and other Imperial forces, such as the Astra Militarum and the Imperial Navy. This need for interbranch coordination exposed weaknesses in communication and logistical planning, weaknesses that would later be exploited during subsequent conflicts. Despite these challenges, the Second Founding's impact was ultimately defined by its success in ensuring the Imperium's long-term survival. The creation of smaller, more adaptable chapters allowed the Adeptus Astartes to recover from the losses of the heresy, while preventing the consolidation of power that had once led to rebellion. The Imperium's military doctrine, its infrastructure, and its very understanding of loyalty and duty were reshaped in the crucible of this reorganization. The galaxy remained a place of endless war and uncertainty, but the Second Founding had ensured that humanity's defenders were better prepared to face the darkness that encroached from every corner of the stars. The Second Founding holds a unique place in the lore of the Imperium, not just for its strategic importance, but also for the myriad of unusual details and lingering mysteries that have captured the imagination of Warhammer 40K enthusiasts for centuries. One of the most widely discussed aspects of the Second Founding is the fate of certain chapters whose origins remain a source of intense speculation. While many chapters proudly trace their lineage directly to one of the founding legions, others have more ambiguous beginnings, often tied to conflicting accounts, fragmented records, or deliberate secrecy. This has led to fierce debates among scholars and fans alike regarding which chapters truly descended from the original legions and which might have been formed under more mysterious circumstances. Among the most infamous of these cases is the debate surrounding chapters that have either lost their official histories or had them deliberately expunged from Imperial records. Some believe these chapters were created during the Second Founding, but later fell into disgrace, while others suggest they were early successors that refused to adhere strictly to the Codex Astartes, leading to their erasure from formal recognition. The idea that the Second Founding may have included shadow chapters or off-the-record creations feeds into a broader theme of secrecy within the Imperium. It raises the question of whether certain powerful figures took liberties with the founding process, creating independent forces to operate outside the traditional hierarchy. Another intriguing element of the Second Founding is the introduction of unique chapter customs and technological innovations that were codified during this era. While the Codex Astartes established a framework for organization and warfare, it also allowed for regional adaptations and individual distinctions within chapters. This led to the emergence of specialized war gear, ceremonial practices, and combat doctrines that have fascinated generations of tacticians and historians. Some chapters took the opportunity to create entirely new symbols of honor and tradition, commissioning artificers to craft relics that embodied their newfound identities. Legendary artifacts such as custom-forged power swords, decorated armor plates, and relic bolters became emblematic of the newfound independence bestowed by the Founding. Another topic that stirs endless debate is the role of experimentation with genetic purity during the creation of new chapters. The Adeptus Mechanicus was tasked with safeguarding and distributing the gene seed, but there are numerous accounts suggesting that this era saw the creation of chapters with subtle genetic divergences. While many adhered to the exact genetic template of their parent legion, others displayed unique traits or adaptations over time, sparking speculation that some chapters may have been intentionally engineered to better suit specific roles or environments. This led to whispered suspicions that not all chapters of the Second Founding were as pure as the Imperium claimed. Some point to physical anomalies or distinct behavioral tendencies within certain chapters as evidence of these subtle divergences, though any formal investigation into such matters tends to be swiftly suppressed. One of the more esoteric aspects of the Founding is the creation of chapter names and heraldry, which often carried significant symbolic weight. Many chapters chose to honor their origins with imagery tied directly to their parent legion's legacy, while others adopted entirely new symbology to reflect their independence. The process of naming a chapter was treated as a sacred act, often involving elaborate rituals and oaths to ensure the chosen name would embody the spirit of the warriors who would carry it into battle. Some names, such as those referencing celestial bodies, animals of myth, or ancient Terran legends, have inspired countless interpretations. The symbolism embedded in chapter banners and relics became a subject of fascination, with scholars analyzing every detail for hidden meanings or connections to pre-imperial history. Additionally, the division of resources and war gear during the Founding led to significant variations in the arsenals of the new chapters. While some inherited entire fleets, vast stockpiles of weapons, and advanced vehicles from their parent legions. Others were granted more modest allocations and had to build their strength from the ground up. This disparity often influenced how the early chapters defined themselves and their strategic approaches. Chapters that received abundant resources became known for their overwhelming firepower and fleet capabilities, while those with fewer assets developed reputations for ingenuity and guerrilla warfare tactics. The question of fairness in these distributions remains a point of contention in historical analysis, as some suggest that favoritism or political motives may have influenced the assignments. Perhaps one of the most enigmatic aspects of the Second Founding is the notion of lost or forgotten chapters, those whose creation was either undocumented or erased over time. Rumors persist of chapters that were deliberately kept hidden from the wider Imperium, either as covert strike forces meant to operate in the shadows or as fail-safes intended to counter potential threats from within. These theories often revolve around discrepancies in early records and the discovery of ancient relics bearing unknown insignias, fueling the belief that the Second Founding may have included projects never fully revealed to the public. This has led some to speculate that there may be dormant chapters hidden among the stars, awaiting activation during humanity's darkest hours. The cultural impact of the Second Founding is also significant. It marked the point at which the Adeptus Astartes became more than an extension of the Emperor's will. They became symbols of resilience, adaptability, and sacrifice. The stories and legends born from this era have become an integral part of the Imperium's mythology, inspiring future generations of warriors and civilians alike. Each chapter carries the legacy of this transformation, and the enduring fascination with their origins continues to fuel both pride and mystery within the Imperium. The Second Founding was not merely a restructuring. It was a redefinition of what it meant to be one of humanity's protectors, and its legacy endures not just in battles fought, but in the very identity of the Imperium itself. Among the most significant figures of the Second Founding were the commanders and leaders who embodied the complexities of this monumental reorganization. These individuals, shaped by the crucible of the Horus heresy and the Great Crusade, stood as symbols of resilience, duty, and at times, controversy. Their motivations, strengths, and weaknesses played crucial roles in the success, or struggle, of the transition from vast legions to independent chapters. One of the most revered leaders during this period was a warrior known for his unyielding adherence to the concept of discipline and order. His reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his unwavering commitment to the Codex Astartes. He viewed the division of the legions not as a loss, but as a safeguard that embodied the Emperor's vision for a unified yet secure Imperium. His analytical mind allowed him to foresee the potential for future chaos and betrayal, and his solution was one rooted in structure and precision. However, his greatest strength, his rigid adherence to doctrine, was also viewed by some as his greatest flaw. Critics argued that he lacked flexibility, that his belief in regulation above all else left little room for innovation. Nonetheless, his dedication ensured that the Codex became the foundation for countless chapters, solidifying his legacy as a master architect of the Imperium's survival. In contrast to this figure was another renowned commander who embodied adaptability and instinct over rigid adherence to doctrine. He was a seasoned warrior who had always believed that victory required both the strength of arms and the flexibility of mind. Unlike some of his peers, he embraced the idea of forming new chapters as a chance to create agile and independent forces tailored to the ever-changing threats facing humanity. His charismatic leadership inspired those under his command, as he encouraged initiative and creativity in battle rather than strict conformity. However, his detractors accused him of fostering a dangerous sense of independence that could lead to fragmentation. They feared that his approach, though effective in certain situations, could undermine the very unity that the Second Founding sought to preserve. Another influential figure was a commander known for his unwavering stoicism and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Having endured some of the most harrowing battles of the heresy, he viewed the Second Founding as a painful necessity, a means of ensuring that future generations of warriors would not suffer the same fate as those who had fallen. His leadership style was characterized by quiet strength and an unbreakable sense of duty. He was not one to seek glory or recognition. Instead, he believed that survival and vigilance were the highest forms of victory. His calm demeanor in even the darkest moments made him a stabilizing force for those who struggled with the transition. Yet, this same emotional distance led some to see him as detached and incapable of inspiring the fervor needed to rally warriors in times of despair. One of the more controversial leaders during the founding was a figure whose methods and ambitions were frequently questioned by his peers. He was a master strategist with a keen understanding of the political and military landscapes of the Imperium. His ability to navigate complex power structures and secure resources for his forces was unmatched. However, his ambition and willingness to operate in the shadows led to accusations of opportunism. Some believed that he viewed the Second Founding not solely as a necessity, but as a chance to elevate his own influence. Despite these suspicions, few could deny his effectiveness. His chapters were among the most well-prepared and well-equipped, their fortress monasteries fortified with unmatched precision. His defenders argued that his pragmatism was essential in a time of rebuilding, while his critics feared that his ambition could lead to unchecked power. There was also a renowned figure who embodied sacrifice and loss. His role in the Second Founding was defined not by ambition or doctrine, but by a deep sense of responsibility toward those who had fallen. Having witnessed the devastation of betrayal firsthand, he carried the burden of remembrance. He sought to instill in the new chapters a reverence for the sacrifices made by their predecessors. His speeches were somber but inspiring, reminding his warriors that their duty extended beyond mere survival. It was about honoring a legacy forged in blood and fire. Yet, this profound sense of loss shaped his outlook in ways that some viewed as detrimental. He was slow to trust and often hesitant to embrace the full autonomy granted to the new chapters. This cautiousness, born from grief, sometimes hindered his ability to adapt to the demands of the post-heresy era. Another key figure during this era was renowned for his innovative approach to warfare and strategy. Rather than view the codex as a constraint, he saw it as a foundation upon which to build new methods of combat. He was a pioneer of combined arms tactics and emphasized the importance of technological integration and battlefield innovation. His chapters became known for their unconventional but highly effective strategies, utilizing advanced reconnaissance and ambush tactics to outmaneuver enemies. However, his tendency to push the boundaries of doctrine led to tensions with more conservative leaders. They feared that his willingness to experiment could destabilize the carefully constructed framework of the codex. His supporters, however, believed that his forward-thinking approach would ensure that the Adeptus Astartes remained a dominant force in an ever-changing galaxy. The leaders of the Second Founding were as diverse in their personalities as they were in their methods. Some saw the Founding as an opportunity to build something stronger from the remnants of the past, while others mourned the fragmentation of the legions and viewed their new roles with a sense of reluctant duty. Their differing interpretations of the Codex Astartes and their approaches to leadership defined not only their chapters, but also the cultural landscape of the Adeptus Astartes as a whole. These figures were not infallible. They were shaped by their experiences, their triumphs, and their losses. It was their vision, resilience, and at times their flaws that ensured the Second Founding did not falter under the weight of its ambitions. They forged the chapters not as mere instruments of war, but as enduring symbols of humanity's will to survive in a galaxy beset by darkness. The Second Founding is surrounded by layers of intrigue and unanswered questions that continue to fuel debates among Imperial historians and Warhammer 40K enthusiasts. Despite the codification of the event and the extensive records maintained by the Adeptus Administratum, there remain gaps in the narrative that invite speculation. One of the most contentious topics is the true number of chapters created during the founding. Official Imperial records suggest that hundreds of chapters were formed, yet there are inconsistencies in these accounts, with some sources hinting at even greater numbers. There are mentions of chapters that appeared fully operational only a few centuries later, bearing names and heraldry unknown to the original records. This has led some to theorize that unlisted chapters may have been created in secret, either as a contingency for future crises or as tools for the High Lords of Terra to wield in shadow conflicts. Equally perplexing is the fate of those chapters that seemingly vanished from history. Some were known to exist during the initial years of the Second Founding, but later disappeared without explanation. Were they destroyed in battles so catastrophic that no record survived? Or were their erasures deliberate, their fates tied to shameful events or rogue actions that the Imperium sought to cover up? The idea of ghost chapters operating beyond the bounds of recorded history has long captivated the imaginations of Imperial scholars. Some even claim that traces of their legacy persist in the form of forgotten fortress monasteries or ancient battle standards discovered in the ruins of long-abandoned worlds. Another enduring mystery concerns the extent of the Adeptus Mechanicus's influence over the Second Founding. While the tech priests were tasked with overseeing the distribution of gene seed and war gear, there are theories that suggest some within their ranks took this as an opportunity to conduct unauthorized experiments. The anomalies seen in certain chapters' genetic traits and combat doctrines have led to suspicions that the Mechanicus may have tampered with the gene-forging process, either to create superior warriors or to further their own esoteric agendas. This theory is reinforced by the existence of rare but unsettling reports of gene seed instability among specific successor chapters, an issue that some believe points to early genetic divergence introduced during the founding itself. The question of lost relics and artifacts tied to the Second Founding also remains a source of fascination. Many chapters forge their identities around powerful relics inherited from their parent legions, yet there are countless references to relics that were never accounted for. Some of these items, such as ancient banners, warships, and master-crafted weapons, were said to be crucial to the chapter's formation, but have since disappeared. There are whispers of entire vaults lost during the chaos of early galactic reclamation efforts, while others believe that some relics were hidden intentionally, either to prevent them from falling into enemy hands or to guard secrets tied to the origins of the chapters themselves. One of the most enduring debates concerns the possibility of hidden successors, chapters whose creation was never meant to be public knowledge. Certain sectors have long been rumored to harbor chapters that operate in complete secrecy, their existence known only to the highest echelons of Imperial command. These hidden forces are thought to be used for missions that require utmost discretion or deniability, striking at threats that the Imperium cannot acknowledge openly. Theories abound that these hidden chapters were given more extreme freedoms than their counterparts, operating outside the restrictions of the Codex Astartes. Whether these stories are rooted in truth or are mere fabrications remains unknown, but the notion of unaccounted-for forces lends a mythic allure to the Second Founding. The role of dissent and conflict during the Founding also raises questions. While the official narrative portrays the event as a largely unified process, there are accounts suggesting that not all commanders agreed with the division of their legions. Some documents, though heavily redacted, hint at mutinies and power struggles during the transition. The existence of these accounts leads to speculation about whether certain splinter groups may have refused the founding altogether, escaping into the void to form renegade warbands. This raises the tantalizing possibility that some successor chapters may have been formed not from loyalist stock, but from splinter factions that later rejoined Imperial service under fabricated identities. The matter of regional assignments and fortress placements also invites scrutiny. The distribution of chapters across the Imperium's vast territories was intended to ensure strategic coverage, but some scholars argue that political motivations influence these placements. There are documented cases where powerful noble houses and influential planetary governors petitioned for specific chapters to be stationed within their domains, citing defense needs but potentially seeking to bolster their own prestige. The potential for political favoritism in these assignments has led to ongoing debates about whether the founding truly adhered to an unbiased, merit-based system or whether it was shaped by behind-the-scenes machinations. Another theory that captivates many is the possibility of early experiments with warp-based technologies during the founding. While forbidden in later eras, there are obscure references to experimental methods for increasing fleet mobility and bypassing long-distance communication delays. Some believe that select chapters were given access to advanced or forbidden technologies in the hopes of creating rapid response forces capable of crossing vast distances in unprecedented time. These theories are supported by fragmentary records of unusual warp phenomena associated with early chapters, though concrete evidence remains elusive. Finally, the Codex Astartes itself remains a subject of ongoing debate. While it is revered as a cornerstone of imperial doctrine, the extent to which it was enforced during the Second Founding is not universally agreed upon. Some chapters adhered to its guidelines with absolute devotion, while others are believed to have only nominally accepted its principles before gradually diverging. This raises the question of whether the Codex was ever intended to be a rigid mandate, or if it was seen as a flexible framework that allowed for adaptation based on necessity. The persistence of chapters with unorthodox structures and combat doctrines suggests that the implementation of the Codex may have varied more than the official records admit. These unanswered questions and divergent interpretations contribute to the enduring mystique of the Second Founding. For all the clarity that imperial records attempt to provide, there remain shadows in its legacy, unexplained disappearances, untold stories, and hints of hidden agendas. These mysteries are not just academic curiosities. They represent the tension between order and chaos that defines the Imperium itself. The Second Founding was meant to bring stability and ensure survival, yet its execution left behind a legacy of questions that continue to provoke fascination and debate across the galaxy. The Second Founding fundamentally reshaped the Imperium, creating a military structure that would endure for millennia and influencing nearly every facet of the galaxy's future conflicts and governance. The long-term consequences of this monumental reorganization can be observed in both the resilience and fragility of the Adeptus Astartes as a force. By decentralizing power, the Founding created a safeguard against large-scale internal betrayal, but it also introduced challenges in unity and cooperation. The formation of independent chapters instilled a sense of identity and pride within each, but over time, this individuality sometimes blossomed into isolationism and divergence. One of the most significant long-term impacts of the Founding was the cultural fragmentation of the Adeptus Astartes. Each chapter developed its own traditions, symbols, and interpretations of duty, which, while enriching the tapestry of imperial history, also led to ideological rifts. Some chapters adhered strictly to the Codex Astartes, while others modified or outright rejected parts of its doctrine. In times of peace, these differences created opportunities for innovation, but in times of galactic crisis, they could become sources of friction. The inability of certain chapters to coordinate seamlessly in the face of massive external threats has been a recurring theme in imperial history. Some catastrophic invasions have only been repelled at great cost due to the hesitation or refusal of certain forces to cooperate fully with one another. The Founding also had profound effects on the Imperium's relationship with its defenders. The independent nature of the chapters granted them significant autonomy, meaning they were no longer directly beholden to imperial command structures beyond their oaths to serve humanity. In practice, this meant that some chapters became aloof from the worlds they were meant to protect, viewing themselves as detached enforcers rather than integrated defenders of the people. This separation contributed to a growing perception among the Imperium's citizenry that the Adeptus Astartes were distant, godlike figures rather than fellow servants of the Emperor. While this mythologization bolstered the awe surrounding the Space Marines, it also created a gulf of mistrust, as ordinary humans struggled to comprehend the motivations and actions of these genetically engineered warriors. In contrast, some chapters maintained close bonds with their recruitment worlds and surrounding sectors, becoming revered as living legends and protectors. This duality in chapter behavior, some remaining loyal guardians of humanity, while others pursued their own interpretation of duty, created a patchwork of relationships across the Imperium. Some sectors flourished under the watchful gaze of their assigned chapter, while others languished under neglect or were left vulnerable when chapters prioritized distant crusades over local defense. This inconsistency has led to long-standing debates among Imperial strategists regarding the efficacy of decentralization versus the need for a more unified command structure. The logistical implications of the founding were equally far-reaching. While the creation of independent chapters allowed for more widespread defense coverage, it also placed a greater strain on the Imperium's infrastructure. Chapters were expected to be largely self-sufficient, managing their own recruitment, supplies, and fortress monasteries. However, the decentralized nature of their operations meant that communication and resource distribution became more challenging. In times of galaxy-wide emergencies, such as massive Tyranid invasions or chaos incursions, coordinating between chapters and other Imperial forces became a complex and often slow process. The lack of a centralized system capable of rapidly deploying United Space Marine forces has in some cases left entire systems vulnerable to destruction before reinforcements could arrive. Another long-term consequence of the second founding is the precedent it set for subsequent foundings. The decision to divide the legions laid the groundwork for future reorganizations of the Adeptus Astartes, though none were as monumental in scale as the second founding. The creation of later successor chapters followed the template established during this era, further reinforcing the Imperium's strategy of maintaining a diverse but compartmentalized military force. While this system has allowed the Imperium to replenish its ranks over the millennia, it has also led to the creation of chapters with increasingly divergent customs and, in some cases, questionable loyalty. This has raised concerns among Imperial leaders that the very measures designed to prevent rebellion could eventually give rise to unforeseen dangers. The founding also cemented the Adeptus Astartes as a symbol of both hope and fear. While they are venerated as the Emperor's chosen defenders, their independent nature and immense power have occasionally led to accusations of arrogance and detachment. Stories of chapters refusing summons, pursuing personal vendettas, or enforcing harsh punishments on Imperial worlds have contributed to a lingering unease among certain factions of the Imperium. Despite this, the psychological impact of the Space Marines' continued presence remains significant. Their very existence serves as a reminder of humanity's resilience and the Emperor's will, even as their internal complexities make them difficult to fully control. On a broader scale, the second founding influenced not only the structure of the Adeptus Astartes, but also the strategic doctrines of the Imperium as a whole. The necessity of deploying smaller, self-sufficient forces encouraged the development of new tactics that emphasized precision strikes, flexibility, and rapid response. This shift in military doctrine had a ripple effect on other branches of the Imperium's war machine, inspiring similar adaptations within the Astra Militarum and the Imperial Navy. However, the reliance on highly autonomous chapters also meant that when these forces were lost or isolated, the Imperium was sometimes slow to recover. The destruction of a chapter could leave an entire sector defenseless, highlighting the double-edged nature of decentralization. Perhaps the most profound long-term consequence of the second founding is its symbolic legacy. It represents both humanity's ability to rebuild in the face of ruin and the ever-present fear of history repeating itself. The founding was an attempt to learn from the past and prevent future betrayals, but it also served as a somber reminder of the Imperium's fragility. For every tale of a chapter's heroism, there is another of its fall or disappearance. The galaxy's ever-growing list of enemies continues to test the effectiveness of the structure born from the Second Founding, and debates about its lasting efficacy remain central to Imperial discourse. In the grim future of endless war, the legacy of the Second Founding continues to shape the Imperium's destiny. The chapters formed during that era have stood against countless foes and endured unimaginable horrors, yet the system itself remains vulnerable to the same internal divisions it was designed to prevent. Whether the Second Founding ultimately strengthened or weakened humanity's defenders remains an open question, but there is no denying that it set the stage for the Imperium's survival across millennia of darkness. What lies ahead may depend on whether the Imperium can adapt once more, or if its rigid adherence to the lessons of the past will become its undoing.